Alleluia, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. Hello and welcome to Wednesday's daily reflection for Easter week. Through this week we'll be looking at accounts from the Bible of those who met with the risen Jesus and how that encounter impacted their lives. We'll be thinking about how an encounter with the risen Jesus can help us as we go through this difficult time. Today we'll be thinking about Thomas. I'm reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, starting at verse 24. One of the disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my fingers in them and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand in the wound of my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus said to him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." I've always thought Thomas gets a bit of a hard time and bad press just because of one episode in his life. I've even heard him criticised for not being present when Jesus first appeared to the disciples, that his absence was somehow because he couldn't be bothered. But we aren't told why he wasn't there. I like to think perhaps he was the one brave enough to pop out to the shops for essential supplies, milk, bread and loo rolls. Well, whatever the reason, Thomas wasn't there when Jesus appeared to the others. He missed that amazing occurrence. And when they tell him about it, he finds it unbelievable. And do we blame him? If we think about it, it's quite understandable that Thomas finds the story about Jesus appearing alive inside a locked room far-fetched. It must have seemed his friends had gone crazy. And so he makes that famous statement, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." And forever after, he is labelled as Doubting Thomas. Maybe we can relate to Thomas and his doubts. Perhaps we find at times the belief that there is a loving God watching over the world hard to believe when we see all the dreadful things happening at the moment. We may find ourselves doubting there is a God, or whether, if he does exist, we can trust him. We might question our faith or struggle with doubts. But I find it interesting to look at the dynamics between doubt and faith in Thomas. Yes, he doubts and questions the truth of Jesus' resurrection, wants the physical proof of touching Jesus' wounds. But then Jesus does appear. And note that Jesus comes to meet him in his doubt. Jesus is obviously aware of what Thomas has said and what he needs. When Jesus does appear, Thomas does not need to touch Jesus. He believes as soon as he sees him and then proclaims one of the most amazing statements of faith in the whole biblical account. "My Lord and my God." Let's think a bit about what a radical statement that is. Thomas proclaims not only that Jesus is a teacher he wants to follow, but his Lord he gives his whole life to. And going further still, that he is God. For a good Jewish believer, this is a potentially blasphemous thing to say. Jews put strong store in the fact that there is only one God. To say that Jesus is God is a radical claim full of massive implications. Thomas is the one who understands the amazing truth of who Jesus is, and one of the first to declare his belief in Jesus as God incarnate. Perhaps this is what underlies his reluctance to believe the disciples' story at first, because he discerns its radical implications if it is true. Maybe, but whatever his reason, his doubt is the forerunner of an amazing step of faith. For me, there is an important relationship between doubt and faith. Some might see doubt as the opposite of faith, but I would argue that you can't have faith without doubt. Faith is believing something that you cannot prove. If you absolutely know something to be true, that's knowledge, not faith. Only if you can't be sure, if you can doubt it's true, is a belief faith. It is natural that faced with situations like our current one, that we will, like Thomas, doubt at times. But when we choose to put our trust in God despite our doubts, when we make a decision to believe despite our questions, that to me is true faith. If we find that we have doubts and questions, let us take encouragement from Thomas that they can lead us to deeper faith. Let us also remember that the risen Jesus came to Thomas in his doubt, did not condemn him for his doubt, but met him in his concerns and offered him the evidence he wanted. Where we have doubts and questions, we can be honest with God about them and ask for his help. We can join with the Father who sought Jesus' healing for his Son and who prayed, "I believe, help my unbelief." As we decide to put our trust in God, may it lead us to deeper faith in him. May God give us strength to exercise our faith and choose to believe in him even when circumstances cause us to doubt. May the risen Jesus help us to see those things around us that encourage our faith. Alleluia! Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia!